more to come. Before I begin today, just because we've only got about 43 people in at the moment, I say about, precisely 43 people, 43 and a half people. I just thought I'd do a little sound check, and this is really on behalf of Jorn, because there were a couple of things that Jorn wanted to share with everyone and we didn't have the chance. So I'm just going to try to do a little sound check. Just let me know if you can hit. If you could just indicate with a little bit of movement like this, a bit of dancing. Put on your
beautiful
sound.
Give me land, lots of land, and the starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide open country that I love. Don't fence me
CCCM
in.
cluster.
Let me be by myself in the evening breeze. Listen to the murmur of the cottonwood trees. Send me off forever, but I ask you please. Don't fence me in. Don't fence me in. Just turn me loose. Let me straddle my own saddle underneath the western skies. On my guides, let me wander over yonder till I see the mountains rise. I want to ride to the ridge where the west commences. Gaze at the moon until I lose my senses. I can't look at hobbles and I can't stand fences. Don't fence me in.
There we go. So that one especially for our favorite musical colleague Jorn, who requested that one. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that woke you up. If you were just thinking of logging on and sitting back and doing a few emails where we chatted on about things, then I hope that's woken you up and you're now with us. So welcome again to those of you just come in. We've suddenly jumped up to 53 people. It must have been because they heard about our fantastic music that we're playing. So if you have just joined, we'd be really keen to hear which of the breakout rooms you joined yesterday. So if you were in one of the breakout rooms yesterday and you enjoyed it, and perhaps you'd be willing to feed back a little bit to us, just write there into the chat and let us know which group you're in. Before we catch up on yesterday, just a reminder of where we are. So here is our map, the path that we've been treading these last 2 weeks, and we're nearly at the end of our path. So you'll see we're over here on Wednesday the 11th, looking at CCCM standards in practice, and Jen is going to lead us in that session a little bit later. Do note there's a white star up there, and the star means a networking opportunity. So after the session today, I think around an hour after the session finishes, for those of you who want to, we're going to come back together to have a networking session. If you haven't joined one of our networking sessions yet, they're quite a lot of fun. We simply arrive in the same place at the same time in Zoom, and then we get into little smaller groups so we can actually have a chat with each other rather than being in this huge group with everybody. And just a chance to meet old friends, make new ones, chat a little bit about your work or about nothing to do with work, whichever you prefer. And we try to mix the groups up a bit as well. So it's a cool way to meet new people. So if you want to do that, that will be at 5 p.m. Geneva time today. Do come along and say hello. And then just to emphasize again, today we'll be focusing on CCCM standards with Jennifer. So we'll be doing that in just a few minutes. But I wanted to take a few minutes before we do that, just to invite Jorn and Jim to come to the fore. So gentlemen, can you hear me?
I can.
Very well.
Excellent. And just to let everybody know, you don't need to adjust your monitor. That is the color of Jim's shirt. So don't feel you need to change anything. That is what it's meant to look like. So no problem there. So first question, I think then to, I should say, by the way, I've got my coffee and I've got my cozy cardigan on, so I'm ready for my chat with you two fellas. First question to Jorn, what did you like most about the session yesterday? What did you enjoy most about it?
Well, I clearly think that bringing the physical environment together with the core and the softer sides of the CCCM cluster is extremely important, because every physical intervention we have, every physical infrastructure we set up has its social infrastructure counterpart, and if we can understand or develop better ways of understanding how we can use the physical infrastructure to impact on the way camps are managed and communities are engaged in doing livelihood activities and so on, I'm sure that we will benefit a lot from it. It's and not less important in the days of COVID, where we need to ensure social spacing and access to services in new ways. So I think we have to be able to clap with both hands and get the best out of it.
Okay, thank you. And Jim, what about you? What about the what do you think was the main message from yesterday for you?
I think for both halves, the first panel and then the breakout group, we deliberately pushed it so we weren't covering well-known territory. And I think we were, in both halves, we were talking about emerging knowledge. I just want to praise and thank everybody involved there for, in a way, sort of being brave, being confident enough, and being willing to share things which weren't just sort of, done deals that you could parrot from somebody else, and really both were exploratory in the best sense possible. I think, just to echo also what Jon says, that so much of the outdoor environment is due to soft things. It's not always just to do with hard engineering, and in some cases, many cases, actually that engineering isn't done by people with tools. It's just done by everybody in the camp walking where they will go, and after a couple of weeks, 10,000 footsteps make the roads that one big bulldozer never could make.
Mm-hmm. And that links, I think, to some of our earlier sessions. If we think back to last week, where we looked at participation, inclusion, accountability, and localization. So I'd be interested in your views on that. I mean, we're talking about some of these softer things, or this engagement influencing the physical environment. Can you give us some examples of how participation, for example, can influence that environment?
Can I jump in on this one, Jon?
Yeah, go for it, Jim.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think my last example, you participate even if you're not aware of it, even if you don't want to. You're walking through a site and you choose the directions you want to go. It's very plastic, it's just mud, and you make the paths along with everybody else, and you've participated in barefoot site planning at the end of the day. But I think there's obviously many other ways where site planning doesn't have to be massive avenues going through a field. A lot of what we do, and I think particularly where camp management actors do come in more and more often, and this was discussed in the second breakout group, is so the sort of smaller scale interventions that happen after the first plan or after the first people have arrived, upgrades, improvements, readaptation, typically just using bamboo and sandbags. I think that sort of intervention is very sort of neighborhood scale, is very much working with others to design and to construct. And I think that's probably where we see a lot of our practice and our best lessons learned.
Mm-hmm. And Jon, let me ask you about that, because I know that you care deeply about this transition, this move from, because there's sort of organized participation and there's a lot of influence there from the international community that's involved and disaster response agencies. But at some point, that influence is diminishing, and at some point individuals, communities, families take over in owning that physical environment and maintaining that physical environment. So just if you could share some of your views there around sustainability and the importance of us considering that for that longer term engagement of the community, that'd be really interesting, I think.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's kind of at the core of being engaged in the CCCM cluster and the work we do. It's I see it more or less like the path you have on the agenda that we walk from a situation where everything is extremely temporal and the people living in that situation are caught in some kind of vulnerability. And then step by step, we increase the path from an emergency roof over the head to a home where people can develop and dream from. And of course, this is something we see in urban settlements, but we also see it gradually growing in camps. And the end result is that people put up a flower pot outside their hut and wipe the streets. And I think that that's a very clear evidence that the environment around where you live has a huge impact on how you can start stepping into a new phase, start dreaming that your kid will become something else than a rickshaw driver. Not to say that rickshaw driving is not a proper profession, but that the path towards from an emergency solution to a home where you are regarded as someone that brings competencies and relevant contributions to the society is clear. And then, of course, the sustainability aspects are extremely important to make sure that
that's Mark Lowcock
we
just trying to get in because he's hearing what you're saying.
all of the that we integrate the different solutions we have on protecting the environment and providing access to new solutions and energy and so on, that it benefits the people and will take part of this path towards becoming a home or a durable solution.
And I gather you are recruiting or looking for input and engagement in the sustainability working group. Is that right?
That's an excellent point.
There you
of
go.
Course, it's, we are here because we care about the situation of people, and I deeply believe that people living in better environmental and physical conditions will surely be something we should all collectively aim at, and I will engage, and I hope a lot of you will engage in the work group on connectivity, energy, clean energy and sustainability in the year ahead, and we will see excellent results at the next retreat.
There you
Promise
go.
you.
We will now hold you on to that. So thank you, Jim, and thank you, Jorn, for the excellent session yesterday and for your answers today. If people are interested in this, if you feel like I think Jim and Jorn and lots of us do about the importance of sustainability, please do try to find the time and feed into that working group because it's really important. And there's a lot of very interesting stuff going on there. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to today's main facilitator to look at standards for CCCM and some, I think, building up to some very exciting announcements. So Jen, it's over to you.
Thanks, Charlie, and welcome everyone. I'm very happy to see so many people joining our session today on camp management standards. It's a kind of celebration session for us, and we'd like to start out by asking if you had any particular role in the consultations or the development of the camp management standards so that we know how much detail to go into. So Charlie, I'm going to ask you to put your Mentimeter on for us. And we're going to ask you to get up your phone and to join Charlie's Menti, which is going to ask if you were involved in the creation of the minimum standards. And that will just help the first part of our presentation to know how much in depth we should go into. So that's code 5328118. And there's many choices. You can vote more than once. And anyone who says, no, but I wish I had been, you still have a chance to help us in our 2020, 2021, 2022 goals, which we will be setting at the end of the session. So it's really good for us to see who is with us and what has been your involvement and awareness around the development of minimum standards for camp management.
So Jen, just to, sorry, there's a bit of a slow start there. I think we got there in the end. Hopefully you can see it. So just to let you know, we've got 88 people in the room and we're just rolling around to about 30 people who voted. So folk, if you haven't voted, and if you haven't used Mentimeter before, just grab your phone, go to the internet browser and just type in menti.com. Don't type in Mentimeter because it doesn't work. Just type in menti.com and have a vote. We're just approaching the halfway mark now. So around 40 people have voted of our 91. So more people are entering the room faster than they're voting. So I guess if you've just entered the room, respond to this question by going to menti.com on some device and please vote.
So this is just a flag to my co-facilitators and the presenters that there's a lot of people joining our session today who haven't been involved. And so that means that we're going to go into a little bit more detail. And do feel free to ask us questions in the chat. We hope that we can manage presenting and answering questions at the same time. So I see we have reached almost the 46 mark, which is about half of the people kind of on the session. So I think that that gives us enough of an indicator, and that will give us more time to maybe answer questions. So thank you, Charlie, for running that brief Menti for us at the beginning. And with that, I will introduce my colleagues and the presenters and the co-facilitators for this. And we are presenting on behalf of the Camp Management Working Group associated with Camp Management Minimum Standards. So I am the chair of that working group. My name is Jennifer Klein-Granmo, and we also have fellow working group members joining us today on our panel and as presenters. So I'm sharing the presentation role with Tom Stork from the Danish Refugee Council and Joe Longcamp from UNHCR, as well as other members of the working group, Monir Udin, Veronica Castorelli, Claudia Drost, and Farhan Yassin. And Monir works with ActionAid Bangladesh. Veronica is currently with IOM, and Claudia and Farhan are with ACTED. But our other members of the working group are NRC, ActionAid, Premier Urgence, and then we also have some independents because they've left their posts, they've taken a break from what they were doing with DRC or with mostly with DRC, and have stayed engaged in the working group. So that's just a matter of kind of the working group. And then I'm also pleased to be having join us as presenters today, Marcus Forsberg from PHAP, who designed our online surveys and conducted 3 webinars with us, as well as Aninia Nadig, who is the Policy and Practice Advisor for the Humanitarian Standards Partnership, and Kit Dyer, who's the editor of our Camp Management Minimum Standards. She may be better known to some people on the call today as a WASH expert. She's also a chapter author for the WASH chapter of Sphere. So we have a great panel of experts, and all of them have played a really critical role in the development of the standards. So I want to start by kind of giving you an overview of what we're going to do in this session, just to give us a bit of a way to pace ourselves. And so that you know how really we're going to be developing the discussion. Because as I said, it's a celebration for us, because over the years, we've been tasked with developing camp management standards. So we want to kind of bring you along our timeline so that you can hear about what were some of the key steps this past year and in previous years, so that you can have a full history and understanding of that process. We also want to discuss what's ahead for us and help you set priorities together with us as the working group, and maybe appeal also, as Jorn and Jim have just done, into launching, launching our new priorities for our working group. We also want to kind of give you a scope of the application of the standards, because they have been used and piloted in a few different ways. And so that's where we're going to hear from Monir and Veronica, Claudia and Ferran. They can kind of tell us about how they have used the standards in their own operations. And then at the very end, we're going to do a little bit of Menti planning and get you a chance to answer some questions that you may have about the development or the consultation process. So that's kind of how we're going to outline the session. We hope that you can also be really fast break takers, because over the break we have some videos that we want to play from our SAG members. And they're really, really nice. And so we didn't have time to play all of them in our session. So we're going to play those over the break. So hopefully you can take a quick break. So it's my role to give the history. And I guess it's a funny role for me to play, but I will attempt to do the history. And what I realize in humanitarian assistance is that everyone has their own version. And so it's good to kind of remind you, where have you come from and where did you start, and what can be your contribution into the history? So if you'll see here on the timeline, there's a small child who's holding a teddy bear. And I would say back in 2010, and we started our retreat with a kind of retrospective looking back, we used to have a story about a very evil general who didn't know what to do with a small amount of assistance that had been contributed to a war-torn country. And so he burned a pile of teddy bears behind the backs of some journalists and did not distribute them to people. And we used that story as a way of kind of telling about the importance of standards. And then we would highlight where they came from Sphere, and where the Humanitarian Charter was so important. And we talked about technical standards as they related to other technical sectors. So we talked about shelter, and we talked about WASH, and we talked about health, but we didn't really have our own technical standards. So that was how we existed for a long time. And we would train quite a lot on Sphere, but we didn't have our own technical standards. Of course, we had the Camp Management Toolkit, but it was a little bit different, and it was kind of good practice. And we said, oh, it's context specific. And if you're to Google it, then maybe around 2017, you can see that we started a consultation around camp management standards. But it's not really clear what came, in that space between 2010 and 2017. I wasn't at this retreat when you can see this tweet went out. So maybe, Alistair, I'm going to ask you to play a video. If you can kind of get our genesis moment into when the camp management, the CCCM cluster might have started thinking about camp management standards. I'm going to stop sharing and let Alistair play a video for us so that we can get our genesis moment.
Hi, Jen. This is the Christine Knudsen video.
It is the Christine Knudsen. And for those of you that don't know Christine Knudsen, she is the former executive director of Sphere.
Hi, greetings from Nairobi. My name is Christine Knudsen, and Jen asked me to talk to all of you today a little bit about the history of where we come from on the Camp Coordination Management Minimum Standards. And it was really exciting to kind of think back to where we were already in 2015. I was the director of Sphere at the time, and I remember having a lot of conversations multiple conversations with Nuno and others in the team, and really starting to explore this idea of minimum standards. And the real question that I came back to, I guess there were two. One was, what's different? What's different about camp coordination and camp management that requires additional standards? What is it that's different from the provision of services? What is it that's different from making sure that there's adequate water, adequate shelter, adequate health care, adequate food and nutrition? And once you know what that is that's different in camp coordination and camp management, then what are your metrics and how do you measure it? And how do you know if you have reached a certain minimum threshold? And this was a conversation that came back 2015, 2016, 2017, and it was really kind of hammering that down into what is different and unique in addition to services. And I really congratulate you on finding that space and being able to find definition to that.
Thanks, Alistair. So we remember, and Gio, I see that you remember telling that story of the teddy bears. I remember telling it too, and it's indeed a mark in our history. But I think we need to listen to what Christine was just saying about the fact that we weren't confident to say, like, what's different about CCCM. We knew our roles, but we weren't definitive in saying, you know, what is it about CCCM that we can measure? What makes a difference at the end of the day and when we walk into a camp that CCCM can be able to say, this is our role and this is the way in which we contribute to humanitarian emergency. So after that consultation in 2017 that you see the tweet on the bottom there with a picture of many people that you will recognize if you zoom in, we went away and those consultations kind of sat on a desk, and then they were discussed at a meeting, and then they were discussed at somebody else's meeting. And I remember I had quite a strong reaction because I was like, okay, this is just sitting here in Geneva. Like, this doesn't have any, like, real camp managers making any type of contribution into it. And I'm not really sure that the people in Geneva know what it's like to manage a camp right now. And Juan turned to me and she said, great, why don't you run a working group on that? So that's how we kind of went into the 2018 retreat, and you can see that we had the great big sheets of paper that had been printed out on A4 paper size, and we had Kim Robinson around the table, and we had Miguel around the table, and we had kind of all of these like important people saying, yeah, but you know, you can't really have camp management standards if there's overlap with core humanitarian standards with the CHS. You can't really have camp management standards if there's overlap with other technical standards. And then we had Giovanna, and Giovanna was saying, yes, but we can't forget the camp management toolkit. We need to be able to make sure that the camp management toolkit is also cross-referenced into these camp management standards. Everybody thought it was a great idea, but there was a real mandate to be able to, one, conduct field consultations, and two, get a clear link into the camp management toolkit, and three, really make sure that there was a wide consultation process, and the consultation process needed to be within CCCM for sure, but also needed to take into account other technical experts. So in 2018, we finished the year, and we had a really great year in 2019. And you'll remember that we did field consultations in Bangladesh, South Sudan, Somalia, Iraq, Turkey. We also held our first online consultation through PHAP, and you'll hear in a moment from Marcus. And that first online consultation with PHAP really had huge interest in the topic. And it made a really big difference because it gave us a strategic direction. It said, is this going to be relevant in only planned sites? Is this going to be relevant for other technical sectors so that they know what you do as well? And we finished that online consultation right before the 2019 retreat. And I say that because in 2019, the kind of feedback that we got as a working group was, you need to do field consultations that include Latin America, because we had not included Latin America. You need to do field consultations that also include government stakeholders. You need to look very closely at the other humanitarian standards partners and make sure that there's a clear cross-reference into them. And so we knew that we needed to expand our terms of reference, not our terms of reference. We needed to expand who was on our working group, and we knew that we needed to make sure that our drafting process was really taking into account this feedback from the first online survey. So we did that, and we were able to invite Aninia to join our working group. And through Aninia in 2020, what we've been able to do is to identify where we needed to do writing and rewriting. And so 2020 has been a lot about writing and rewriting, and we did that through a number of ways. One, we did a consultation with humanitarian standards technical authors. And so WASH, shelter protection, child protection, MERS, which I'm going to have Kit elaborate what exactly MERS is, CALP and LEG, which are the agricultural and emergency technical standards, all provided feedback on our draft minimum standards. And we also had the opportunity to do consultations online because of COVID through the kind of Latin American partners, in which there were 38 different partners from UN organizations, NGOs. There was over 90 people who participated in that consultation in this past year, from all the way from Argentina up to Mexico. And I want to just talk a little bit about the smaller NGOs that were part of that consultation, as well as some of the large NGOs like Samaritan's Purse and Plan International. But we also were lucky enough from the government of Guatemala, Peru, and El Salvador to have inputs from the civil protection. So I think we accomplished what we were mandated to do or asked to do in 2019 through this online consultation. And then happened COVID, and with COVID came the opportunity to think, okay, how do we really operationalize standards in camp settings? Everyone was quite concerned about what would be happening through into the camps, and I think that that concern was highlighted yesterday through the session that we had. And we held a second webinar together, co-hosted with Sphere and with PHAP, in which we talked about operationalizing standards. And during that first conversation, when we were talking about operationalizing standards in camps, we met Kit Dyer, and Kit Dyer also, through her, hi Kit, through her consultation with the humanitarian standards partners, made a very sharp comment in which she says, throughout the entire document, it might be useful for the authors to ask themselves a sentence like, what if we take this same sentence, and what if camp managers, how could camp managers enhance participation, foster accountability for the affected population, and facilitate information management? If they don't help out with the indicators, get rid of them. For example, in this case, and she goes on for almost a half a page, just with really critical comments about how poorly we had done in the inclusion of our indicators. Not poorly, but that we could do better. And so when Kit joined our reflection around the COVID webinar with PHAP, we were saying, well, we're looking for an editor, and it happened that Kit's comments really struck home to us, and she had some really good ideas. And so we hired Kit. So as we enter this retreat, we have been through lots and lots of different stages of consultations and lots of different stages of getting feedback from outside our technical sector. So we give you the timeline to the standards as a way of presenting what has been our process And now it's good to hear maybe from Marcus about what we learned through the online consultations. So Marcus, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to give you a chance to dive in and to tell us about what we learned through the online consultations, both the first one, but maybe more of an emphasis on the second one, which was our validation.
Okay, so thanks, Jennifer. So as you mentioned, I'm with PHAP. So we're the International Association of Professionals in Humanitarian Assistance and Protection, a bit of a mouthful for a professional association of individual humanitarian workers across the sector. So we have about 6,000 individual members and a wider network of around 50,000. So we're a cross-sectoral association, and as such, we developed expertise in engaging and consulting with the full diversity of humanitarian actors on policy questions in general, but importantly also then including the development of different standards, as these will have an impact on their work, both as specialists but also for practitioners more in general. So yeah, so we were happy to be approached by the CCCM cluster to support with the development of the new camp management standards, which were already well underway. But we're at as Jennifer has already been describing, at quite a critical stage for moving them forward to the next level in terms of being grounded in practice. So so as you mentioned, to help inform the next steps, then as the first step was that we surveyed our network and the CCCM clusters network, of course, both on the overarching questions of the standards, to prompt that kind of critical view that Jennifer pointed out that Kit provided, but also others gave their kind of critical view on the overall approach of the standards. So their overall purpose, their relationship to other standards and their structure, but then also at the same time to look at the actual content of the standards. This was combined with a webinar to help with the outreach and also to discuss some of the preliminary results, and as part of a longer structure and a longer process that to some degree was then cut short of due to the onset of COVID.
Marcus,
But,
should I be
yeah.
showing your, I'm so sorry, should I be showing your slides right now? I apologize.
They're not particularly, yes, but
Okay.
that I don't have them since you were, but I think people can live without the slides as well otherwise. So, but yes, feel free to start sharing them if you have them available. So then so this process engaged, well, in total, the two services engaged about 700 practitioners in total, from all major humanitarian contexts. We had particularly strong participation from as you can see there, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan, and also from the full organizational spectrum. And importantly, I would highlight that this included both those who specialized in camp management and coordination, which were the ones who had, and correct me if I'm wrong there, Jennifer, but they were the ones who had primarily been part of developing the standards to date, but then also a large portion of those respondents whose work related directly to camp management without being camp managers themselves in different ways, and also felt that strong need for the standards. So another aspect to mention there, I think, is that although we were surveying practitioners here, which was the focus, which also makes sense for, of course, a professional standard, more than a quarter of the respondents also indicated that they had been displaced themselves. So then practitioners with a history of displacement at a personal level. So they also brought that perspective themselves, but so they served as a bit of a complement then to, of course, all of the on-site consultations carried out by Jennifer and her colleagues. So I'm not going to go into too many details of about this, but I would maybe highlight two just general results that were quite important. The first was just already at that stage a strong overall support for the standards, but in particular the relationship to other standards clearly needed clarifying. There was quite a lot of confusion among the respondents, both among the specialists, but in particular when you looked at respondents who were not camp managers themselves. Then second, I would also highlight the need expressed by practitioners from all across the sector for standards that both provide that kind of standardization level, but importantly provide guidance for how they can carry out camp management in their context. So something that is context neutral, but that can then be applied in their context. Did you want me to mention straight away about the validation survey as well? A few words about that, or Jennifer?
Yes, I'd love to do that. And I just see that I'm sharing the presentation in a bit of an awkward way, and so I apologize for that. And I will, if you want to start sharing on the validation survey, that would be great, Marcus.
No problem at all. No, and as I said, the slides aren't, they're just a bit of illustrations about the results. You're not missing anything critical there. For the validation survey, so about then, so between, as Jennifer mentioned, and as you may have noticed, we did have a global pandemic in between. There was a lot of other activities planned over that year. Some happened, others had to be changed. But after then a year, we had a very much reworked standard that we wanted to run a validation process for, to make sure that these changes actually reflected the priorities of practitioners and was completely on the right track. So this one drove somewhat smaller and more specialized set of respondents compared to the first one. But again, with a large proportion of these respondents having experience of being displaced themselves. And again, many of them providing in-depth comments on the aspect of the final draft. From this, I would mainly, like I said, I'm not going to go into the more detailed results, but just to highlight that this helped validate that the improvements made to the standards had been on the right track. Practitioners overall were strongly in agreement with this. There was strong support for the approach. The way they approached the target audience and the scope of the standards was described and laid out. And then also when we focused in on the individual standards, we found that each individual standard scored well in terms of overall support among respondents, also indicating that there was a strong correspondence with the views of the practitioners participating in this validation between what these standards focused on and what they saw as the operational priorities in their work. Finally, I would also just highlight that the clarity and level of detail of the standards was improved, that we had validated, and also in particular the clarity on the relationship to other standards and guidance was greatly improved. That also came through clearly in that validation survey. There's of course a lot more detail there that you may want to dig into. There are two reports that I think you have on the CCCM website now. Otherwise, they're also on the event page. So I can share the links to those in the chat. But yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, not to just give you about a little bit about the highlights.
Thanks, Marcus. I'm just going to check the chat here and see if there's any questions that are relating back to the statistics. And it would be really nice, Marcus, if you can just tell us, like, from a statistical standpoint, you know, we were conducting in-person consultations primarily with CCCM experts, and through both the first validation and the second validation, it seems that we've reached a wider catchment. Can you just highlight again what you were just saying about people being outside of the CCCM sector? It was about 50-50 from our first surveys that we were getting people outside of CCCM family.
Yeah, so I mean, while it can be a little bit difficult for people to clearly define exactly how they relate to camp management, there's definitely a gray zone in between. Then roughly 50% of the respondents were relating to camp management as primarily as general project managers or technical specialists in other areas, working in camps and with camp managers.
Okay, thank you. That's useful. I don't see any other questions coming to you right now, Marcus, from the chat, but I hope you'll stay with us in case anybody kind of thinks through those different validation standpoints. And just to thank you and PHAP, because you really helped us get a lot clearer, and we learned a lot, obviously not enough on how to project slides, but we did really learn a lot through our partnership with you, and we hope that that can continue. So if you do come up with any questions for Marcus, he's going to stay with us throughout the entire session. So thank you, Marcus. We've mentioned a couple terms that are perhaps, if you're not part of the working group, you may not have heard before. And one was Humanitarian Standards Partnership. And I see that Kit and Charlie have kind of put that into the chat there. And they are the larger secretariat that deals with all of these handbooks that I hope many of you have on your bookshelves, and you can see behind me. And Aninia Nagid is with us, and Aninia, you've been the policy and practice person for the HSP, and I don't see you turning on your camera, and I hope that you do. And also, Kit, you were a chapter author for Fear and an editor for us. And so what we thought we'd do next is give us a chance for everybody online to kind of dig into the standards a little bit more, to have you talk us through the structure, and to have a kind of coffee with Joe. So Joe, I'm going to hand over to you, and you and Kit and Aninia can talk a little bit more about what's in the standards and how do they relate back to the other technical standards that are within the HSP partnership. And Kit, are you going to play your own slides, or would you like me to play?
No, I can do it. It's no problem.
Great.
If I can control the screen.
You've got control. Over to you.
Woohoo.
Great, thanks, Jen. As Jen mentioned, we've got Kit and Aninia with us today, and I'm really excited to be talking with them. I think of them as being a bit like standards gurus. So we're going to have a cup of tea and a chat about the standards and answer some of the questions like, what do the standards cover? What do they look like? And other questions that you may have as well. So welcome, Kit and Aninia. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Kit.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
I'd like to start with a question to Kit, because Kit's been working with us on editing the minimum standards for camp management. Could you tell us, Kit, a little bit about what the standards actually cover, particularly for those that are not familiar with the standards?
Yeah, sure. so my involvement with the standards, I think, has been pretty thoroughly outlined, and Marcus highlighted a couple of the key things that came back from the consultation about improvements that could be made. So that was something kind of forward in my mind. So what I did, and I shall share the presentation, is, does that work? Tell me yes. Excellent. I love it when it works.
Yes.
So what I did was I tried to look at ways that these standards could be similar to the others in terms of structure. And there's a few reasons for that. But so this is what it ended up looking like. So the front end of the standard, the whole like handbook, if you like, of standard, which didn't really exist too much before, covers some of the history of why we've got the standards, which Jen's outlined. It has a bit of a discussion about who we want the standard to be aimed at, what the structure is, how it links to other standards, and then a discussion about what is site management, why is it necessary? And that was actually quite a bit of an eye-opening conversation for me. I came to the work with almost no understanding of what camp management or site management really did. So that's been really useful for me to be able to unpack what was already there and say, well, how do you really do that? What do you really do? And I think that's a question I've asked so many people in the last 2 months. So now I think hopefully we can say quite clearly in the standards, this is what camp management is. A discussion about where standards apply, and this was very much linked to the early decisions about both locations and I guess the whole spectrum of where the standards should apply. A bit of a discussion about the fundamental principles, and then a couple of key things about the camps being a last resort for displaced people, and a discussion about what the provider of last resort means. Much of what is in this front end is either linked very strongly to, if not directly copied from, the other standards or from other documents. So it's a capturing of other information to try and bring it together. That's a few pages at the front of the document, maybe 5 or 6, maybe a few more. And then we come to what is the guts of the minimum standards for camp management. The early versions had a set of sections, if you like, and I'll use the phrase domain because that's something that we've used in other standards as well. So we ended up with these 5 domains that cover the domain of site management policies and capacity, the domain of community participation and representation, the domain of site environment, the domain of site service coordination and monitoring, and the domain of site closure and exit planning. Those of you who saw perhaps earlier versions, and I know about half of you didn't, but those of you who did see those earlier versions will see there's a similarity. That range of the big picture didn't change. And part of the reason for that was that in the PHAP survey, the second round, the last one that I was involved with, there was a question asked of people, do you think the standards cover everything they need to? And on the flip side, is there anything in here that doesn't need to be there? And both questions came back with, no, actually everything that's in there needs to be there and everything we need is in there. So that's how we came up with these 5 domains. Within the domains, then we have a set of standards, and altogether there are 8, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I can count, can't I? Yeah, 17 standards that are setting out the big statements of what we or what camp management sees as fundamental to delivering the services that they say they're going to deliver, or you say you're going to deliver. I won't go into detail on all of the standards. I think that's a document we'll be sharing fairly soon, so you can get into the nuts of what's in there. But just to say that the first set of standards, that first domain, is a little bit different from some of the other standards that are out there, in that mostly the standards that are involved in, let's say, Sphere, as a WASH person, I look at the standards and those standards apply to me as somebody in the field. I'm a WASH person in the field, therefore the standard applies to what it is that I'm doing. The standards for this first domain do apply to site managers in the field, but they also apply to the organizations that hire them. So there's a little bit of a difference there, but it was something we thought was too important to leave to another document. Joe, I think that's about all I really wanted to say on the structure of it. Other than those of you who are familiar with other standards will see a lot of similarity in the way that they're linked up. Over.
Thanks, Kit. I mean, I think it's really clear from this that there is a real linkage between an alignment with the camp management toolkit, which a lot of people here will be familiar with, even if they've not seen the standards before.
Absolutely.
I'm also wondering, Kit, these are not the first standards that have been developed for the humanitarian sector. We have, sphere standards, child protection minimum standards for education, etc. How do the minimum standards for camp management relate to these other existing standards, and how are they structured as well? I think you touched on this a little bit, but it'd be great to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. That was something we thought would be quite critical, that we wanted a way that the standards could talk to each other. So that, again, like I'm a WASH person in the field, I turn up somewhere and it's really useful if the camp manager has a set of standards that talk to the standards that I'm bringing with me in my bag of goodies. So what I did, was the way I structured it was to have that initial standard. It's an expression of a fundamental human right, if you like. I'm really hoping that most of the standards are not something that you couldn't say, no, actually, I disagree with that. So taking the example from community participation, the standard itself is that the site population is able to participate meaningfully in decision-making related to site management. Now, nobody's going to say, actually, no, they shouldn't. They shouldn't be participating in the decision making. That's, it's not going to happen. And that's the same with the standards for the other the other suite of standards that are out there. The WASH standards look at that quality of service delivery. They don't look so much in the standard itself of any numbers, any figures, or anything like that. It's the expression of that fundamental human right. The next bit was that similar to most of the other standards, we had a set of key actions. And we tried to make these key actions, and they're very strongly linked to the toolkit, but they're actions, they're verbs. We're looking at planning and budgeting, engaging, training and supporting, advocating, monitoring, reporting. We tried to find as many really active verbs as we possibly could to say that these are key actions. Now, the key actions are to be contextualized, and if it really doesn't work in your environment, then that's fine. They don't have to work everywhere, but they were a grab bag, if you like, of the actions that we thought that most people would be familiar with. And they're the things that you'll need to do in order to be able to make sure that the site population is able to participate meaningfully in decision making. The third bit is that we came up with a number of indicators. This is quite tricky. And I won't talk too much about that right at the moment, but the idea of the indicators is that it's a pulse feeling. So we wanted to make sure that if I can answer these questions around these indicators in a positive manner, like that there's a good percentage of the site population who are satisfied with things, or there's a good percentage of female committee members who feel whatever it is. If I can be positive on those things, then I'm going to be confident to say, yep, our standard is being met. If I'm not positive on any one of those indicators, so if the pulse isn't really there, then I've got a problem and I have to do something about it. And the fourth piece of the puzzle, if you like, or of this whole standard itself, is a bunch of guidance notes. They're specific to the standard, and we've tried to put in a little bit about different contexts where it could be useful. The guidance notes are really only touching on it. There's a lot more guts to guidance, if you like, in other documents like the toolkit or the IDP handbook. We've tried to link it really strongly to both the Camp Management Toolkit and the IDP handbook, to sphere standards, and also to CHS, because that's something I think a lot of us are struggling sometimes to operationalize. What do these sphere standards really mean? Whereas in fact, the camp management standards are a really good way of trying to do that, and to any other kind of resources. That was the first way that we were trying to make the standards link to each other, to try and talk to each other, so that if if I'm looking at any of the suite of standards, if I'm coming as a technical specialist into a place, it's the same way of talking to each other. So that should hopefully be something that makes that conversation between camp managers and perhaps service providers or cluster coordinators a bit easier. The other thing we tried to do was then to link really explicitly to the Camp Management Toolkit, to the IDP handbook, to Sphere standards and to CHS. So when you do eventually get to see the document, there are really explicit linkages there. And I've tried to use the color to do that as much as possible as well. We'll see if that stays through layout. The second one, and this was really quite innovative, and I have to admit, I did not come up with this, but I think it's a really great idea. So the index to the camp management standards is the same as every other index, that there's a, like for example, there's an index on participation, and it'll give you the page numbers of the handbook where participation is discussed in any sort of meaningful way. What we've also tried to do, and I hope we can actually make this work, is that we've included the same reference index to where it is in the Camp Management Toolkit and inside Sphere, the handbook. So that if you're looking for participation inside the camp management standards, you can actually also go find, will explicitly tell you where to go and find those same discussion around participation inside the toolkit and inside Sphere. I think this is quite an interesting idea, and I really hope we can make it work. I think it's something we can do and do quite well. As I said, the other way of doing it was to have the structure and the language of the documents try and relate to each other as strongly as possible. I keep coming back to this because I think it's one thing that site managers or the CCCM cluster can actually use in a really strategic way when it comes to advocacy about camp management, about CCCM. Trying to have that discussion with donors and with other clusters or with governments can be a little bit tricky if you don't have something that actually shows the core of what you do. And the toolkit's great, but it's a bit too much detail. This document is designed to be something that you can have a direct conversation with cluster coordinators, with the service providers, with governments, both host and perhaps with donors as well, to say, hey, listen, this is important, and this is why it's important. We've got standards that can help us to do this now. And the language we've used throughout the document, it also reflects largely Sphere, because that's the one I'm most familiar with, but it's also something that they can talk to each other as well. I wanted to look at very quickly, if I can, Jo, just a couple of the standards, just to unpack them a little bit. So I'll give you 1 or 2 minutes, Kit. Super, thanks. I wanted to show, so the standard 3.1 is about having a safe and secure environment. And the language of it is that all site residents and service providers live in a dignified environment that is safe and secure from harm or violence. If I go and have a look in Sphere, I can very quickly find inside just the wash piece of Sphere a whole bunch of linkages that has that direct conversation, so that there are standards inside the wash piece of Sphere that have a direct link to that standard 3.1. If I look in any of the other standards, the education one or the child protection one, there's some really very direct linkages about the same language and providing that safe and secure environment. And then if I do the flip side of that and go and have a look at one of the other standards, if I have again a look at Sphere, in the health system standard, which I picked one about health service delivery, which is that people have access to integrated quality healthcare that is safe, effective, and patient-centered. If I then go back and have a look at the Camp Management Toolkit, I can see all of these standards that directly impact on the health people being able to deliver against that standard, all of them basically. So there's the role for camp managers, I think, or site managers is really, really important in helping the rest of us to deliver against our standards, as well as the other way around. And that's something we've tried to structure so that the documents talk to each other in such a way that it makes your job a little bit easier. Sorry if that took a bit long, Jo. I got quite excited.
Thanks, Kit. No, I think it's really interesting, and it's really great to see the interlinkages with the other standards being really well recognized. And it also leads nicely into a question I have for Aninya. We saw earlier in the timeline this mention of the Humanitarian Standards Partnership, or HSP, which Aninya, I understand that you're coordinating. it'd be great if you could tell us a little bit more about what the HSP is and also why there would be interest for the minimum standards for camp management to become a member.
Yes, thank you, Joe. Just to clarify, so I work for Sphere as policy and practice manager, and in that role, I also spend some time coordinating the HSP, which is a really, until today, quite informal group of 7 standard setting initiatives. And we've been working together since the beginning was around 2008, when INEE, Education in Emergency Minimum Standards, became the first companion to Sphere. Because there was no space in the Sphere handbook, they had developed standards in a Sphere-like manner, which means very consultative, consensus-based, and based on best practices. And there was no space in Sphere, so Sphere and INEE came up with this idea of a companionship. Later, livestock minimum standards, LEGS, joined economic recovery standards, MERS, child protection standards, a market analysis standard through CALP, and the latest handbook that joined are the inclusion standards for older people and people with disabilities. And eventually, a few years ago, the companionship model turned into a more egalitarian, let's say, partnership. The reason, what holds us together is that we base our standards on the same foundation, which is the Humanitarian Charter, the Protection Principles, and the Core Humanitarian Standard, the CHS. And as handbooks update, they also integrate those 3 foundation chapters more thoroughly and more consistently. And what we really want to do is take advantage of that very limited space, which is standards. You know, there's very few people out there in the world who get excited about standards, Kit apparently being one of them. And the importance is for us to take the space we have together and to explain what standards are there for. They occupy a very specific space in this huge space of guidance, and they are not guidance like any other guidance. They are the what and not the how to, and that warrants a particular attention and focus, and also promotion of that kind of important first entry into an issue sort of guidance. Yeah, that's what we do. And why should you guys join? I mean, Kit, you just made you already the best HSP partner we ever had, basically. So the thing is, we learn from each other. That's a huge part of it, which is internal. You don't see it externally. But every revision, every new standard coming in, have learned something new and bring a new element to the table upon which the others can then build. Interestingly, we are looking precisely at a mapping tool for the entire HSP, which looks a lot like what Kit just described, to say, if we look at, I don't know, livelihoods, where do we find livelihoods and how in the various handbooks, and how do they connect to each other? So for something like camp management, which is coordinating so many different elements that are represented in the HSP handbooks, there's almost, I don't see any reason why you would not want to join, because it gives you an excellent learning platform internally, but also an excellent way to make your standards known, and to make sure that all other practitioners refer back to and understand the camp management standards. And one last thing, there are 3 candidates, 2 other candidates for a potential HSP membership, and that is on logistics and agriculture. And as you can see, the kinds of standards, the kinds of topics covered by the standards is broadening out eventually from a pure sector to modalities, to support sectors. And that is also quite interesting. So camp management is a coordination contribution, which I think is hugely, hugely beneficial to HSP.
Thanks, Ananya. I think, lots of really great selling points there for us. I had another question, which I think is quite important and that we get a little bit confused about sometimes, is we have indicators and we have standards, as we saw in Kit's presentation. And I'm hoping that you can explain to us a little bit more about what is the difference between a standard and an indicator.
Yes, thank you. It's a question that has been haunting us for over 20 years now. A standard is a qualitative global expression of a right that is applicable anywhere and cannot be contextualized because it just applies, whether that's a camp or urban or whatever. And an indicator is what Kit very aptly described. A set of indicators are signals to see whether you reach the standard, and if you in this latest handbook edition, Sphere has tried to reshape its indicators so that they need to be contextualized more naturally and with some metrics or some percentage suggestions so that people understand we need to develop our own baseline and targets and measure the progress towards those indicators according to the context. And if you don't do that, if there's confusion between, if we say, if someone says 15 liters per person per day is a Sphere standard, then we're in trouble, because then the basic right to sufficient access to clean water, to access to sufficient amount of clean water, that's what we're actually talking about. And the 15 liters help us measure that, help us see where are we at in that spectrum. And sometimes I think people forget to look and really read and integrate what's written in the standards itself. There was a famous French letter about 20 years ago that was sent to Sphere at the very beginning of the Sphere project, and those NGOs felt that working with standards greatly constrains our ways of working, and that in fact, without having that liberty to work differently in every single context, the quality of humanitarian work actually diminishes. And this is really the crux of having standards in such a contextualized setting, is to always remember that we start from the standard, the expression of a right, and we need to contextualize the indicators. Otherwise, I would argue standards can actually do quite a bit of harm indeed. And that message keeps to be absolutely crucial. And I'll leave it there because I think Kit has very good concrete examples to show that.
Thanks, Ananya. Yeah, I mean, if I have time, I'd like to pick up maybe just on the contextualization before we move along. And maybe taking an example from the minimum standards for camp management and going to Kit, I'm wondering if I have an indicator that doesn't make sense in my context, what I should do. For example, there's an indicator that says one site management team per 15,000 displaced persons. But what if, for example, in my context, there are lots of smaller sites of less than 15,000 people? Should I just ignore them?
Certainly not. I think that would be the immediate answer. Yeah, developing on from what Ananya has said, it's the standard itself is the important place to start with the discussion. So the standard itself for, I haven't got it on me at the moment, but the standard itself for that particular indicator, if you like, is that the people have the right to somebody who knows how to manage sites with the right capacity, with the right experience, with the right tools, with all the, it can't just be people coming in without any experience. And it doesn't matter who that person is, but the person who is going to be somehow responsible for whatever the site is has to have the capacity. So the idea of the 15,000, 1 per 15,000 persons was about right. It felt about that's about the right number of people en masse somewhere where you've got a site management team who are able to meet the needs of those people. Bigger than that, you're going to need more than one team. It doesn't mean that you can't have more teams per 15,000 people if it makes sense in the context because you've got people scattered, if it makes sense in the context because you've got barriers between people that are very difficult to get across, like rivers or big roads or something like that, then yeah, you might need more than one team to manage the site for that many people. So that's the two things I think we'd come back to, is that any of those indicators that include some sort of metric, they're a minimum. So you can definitely do better than that, and you should actually be aiming to do better than that. And the second is that it's got to make sense in the context that you have. So don't abandon the indicator altogether, but to look at the way that you could make it apply, make it work for you. As I said, I'm not a site management expert. I'm a WASH person. We've done some work in different countries to come up with, we use 15 litres per person per day in some aspects, but in other places that is nowhere near close enough. So I know in northern Iraq, for example, in the summertime, we'll get up above 150 litres per person per day because of the way that people demand to live. Their right to a life with dignity means that they need so much more water. You can't live in 50-degree heat without some sort of air conditioning, for example, and most of it's water cooled. The same sorts of sensible approaches will apply to the application of the standards or the indicators in CCCM as well, I would imagine. If that helps.
Thank you, Kit. No, I think it's becoming much clearer. I hope it is for everyone else as well. I'm realizing that we're getting tight on time. So Jen, maybe I'll hand back to you to hear about what's coming up next.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Aninia and Kit. There were a couple really good questions in the chat. And one person, hi, Richard, was asking if we can already start using the indicators in the HNO and HRP. And that's an excellent plug to the videos that are going to be shown. And indeed, in the history, they were used in pilot versions of project plans in Somalia by a cluster coordinator who is a friend to the working group and a friend to many of us. So you can watch for the video by Catherine Ziga over the coffee. And I think it's also excellent to make sure that you watch the history of 3.5 meters squared. I think our 15,000 indicator kit is going to be the same as the 3.2 meters squared. I said 3.5, 3.2 meters squared within shelter, and yours 15 liters kit. So we found our indicator that's going to make everybody remember us, which is 15,000 persons per one camp management agency. But let's watch Jim Kennedy as we take a break and come back in 15 minutes, which according, in 10 minutes, which according to my time would be 3:13. So that's a very tight time frame to grab a cup of tea, but I also hope you get to watch the videos. So Alistair, can you show us first Catherine Ziga, please, and we'll invite everybody to a coffee break.
Hi, my name is Catherine Ziga, and I was the CCCM cluster coordinator in Somalia from 2017 until 2020. We started using the camp management standards in 2018 in Somalia when we were developing the humanitarian response plan for 2019. We used the standards to bring together partners to have consultations and decide the strategic objectives of the cluster. Then we developed, based on the CM standards framework, an activity set, which helped NGOs design their HRP project sheets to ensure that all the activities they were listing were in line with the cluster strategy. In 2019, we held a consultation for the CM standards in person so that partners could go through the newest version of the standards and add their comments and their feedback and kind of trial run how the standards were working. This consultation was attended by 2 UN agencies, 5 national NGOs, and 2 international NGOs. Thanks.
There's no shelter standard better known perhaps than the standard for indoor shelter space, 3.5 square meters per person. But why is it 3.5 square meters per person? Where does that number come from? Why is it 3.5 square meters per person and not 3 meters or 3.75 or twice the width of a person or the space for a person and an average suitcase? The answer is it's just been cut and paste from a relatively random non-humanitarian source. In 1971, there was an earthquake in Iran, and the German Red Cross came in with a lot of prefabricated shelters. Somebody from the Iranian Ministry of Health saw those shelters and thought that these amazing prefab, very modern shelters must be the gold global standard for shelters, and he measured them and he calculated that they were 3.5 square meters per person, and he wrote that in a little booklet for health in settlements and camps. And 10 years later, that got copied into the first editions of the UNHCR Handbook for Emergencies, and 10 years later, that got copied into some other documents, and by 2001, it got copied into Sphere, and that was it. And those prefab little huts that the German Red Cross brought with them all the way to Iran are still, to this day, on the German commercial market as perfectly normal, non-humanitarian holiday huts for German holidaymakers holidaying in northern Germany.
زين. لماذا؟ عدة نقاط. يعني أولا تواصل مع النازحين، الإبلاغ عن كل ما هو جديد في المخيم، سماع آراء النازحين وحل مشاكلهم بأسرع وقت أمكن.
جيد. لماذا؟ أن تتابع شكاوي النازحين وحلها بأسرع وقت. تشرف الإدارة على التوزيع وإعطاء كل نازح حقه، وتقوم الإدارة بحل المشاكل من النزاعات داخل المخيم بدون تدخل أي جهة أخرى.
زيادة ساعات تشغيل المولدات، تبليط الشوارع، لأن نحن نمر بفصل شتاء، وهذا لتسهيل المرور بالقواطع. يعني.
I'm excited that the minimum standards for camp management has now progressed to a final draft, ready for endorsement and hopefully soon application at field level. It might be a good time to reflect on why we initially set out to develop the minimum standards. At the time, there was a widely shared sentiment that it would add value to further emphasize and agree on the core components of camp management, not least with a view to the key deliverables that could always be expected in a camp management operation. This in order to enhance the predictability and I would say the recognizability of camp management operations across agencies and in different contexts. I hope that DRC will be able to use the minimum standards to inform our program and enhance quality. I expect that we will apply them in various settings involving refugees, internally displaced people, and mixed migrants. DRC has been heavily involved in developing the minimum standards more or less since the outset at the global cluster level, in the strategic advisory group, and of course, most importantly, in the working group that actually developed the standards. This has included the initial drafting, the reviewing, and quite importantly also the field consultations that might have involved a number, or that did involve a number of camp management colleagues. I hope now that the minimum standards will also be useful to camp management colleagues across and agencies widely in the sector, and will find that they can actually add value at the point of delivery with the overall objective and scope of enhancing the protection of the affected population, which is overall what we strive for, of course, when we implement camp management.
I'm very grateful and proud of the tremendous work done by the CCCM Standard Working Group during the last 3 years. I think it's impressive that the CCCM standards were developed with the input from a large number of camp management practitioners and also from the community. I see the CCCM standard as a natural evolution of the camp management toolkit. They provide a practical benchmark that very well complement the guidance we can find in the toolkit. I think that the CCCM standards will be very useful for our work in the field. They will provide camp management practitioners with support when they set up objectives, when they design a monitoring and evaluation framework, and also will provide a common platform for agency from camp management agency working in the same areas, in the same context, to define a common vision and common strategies. Also, I'm very glad to see that the CCCM standards take in consideration the experience and the learning of applying camp management methodology outside the formal camps developed during the last years.
I'd like to talk about how shelter staff can and should use Camp Management Standard 3 for site environment, and in particular Camp Management Standards 3.1 and 3.2, which talk about a safe and secure and appropriate site. I think there's many site planners around the world who might assume that you do your site plan once and then it's forever done with. But the Camp Management Standards give us a common language to talk about site planning as a process and how we can engage with all stakeholders, not least those actually living in the site, to continue the process of observation, listening, engagement, to keep on improving the site and improving the site environment and the site plan throughout the lifespan of the whole site and afterwards.
The South Sudan in-country consultation took place in 2019, early 2019. We had 2 consultants that arrived in the country. We had a debrief with them. We went through the terms of reference and the locations they're supposed to meet. We identified, we agreed on the target population they're supposed to meet. So they went to the field, starting with Juba. We have a big POC with a population of 29,000 IDPs. In Juba POC, They met with the CCCM cluster state focal point that guided them into the IDP camp, where they met all the partners that are working in Juba POC, including meeting up with the IDP population, both men and women, girls and boys. We also have some displacement sites in Juba City, some collective sites, Don Bosco, Mangaten, where they visited and had very good discussion with the IDP population. They also went to WOW, same thing, they met with the partners that are working in WOW POC, they met with IDPs. In particular, they met with the Community Leadership Committee that were able to highlight some of the challenges they have with the leadership. One, we know is a voluntary work to be a camp committee member, but they're asking that they needed some bit of facilitation in order for them to be able to function well. You cannot volunteer even just for 6 months doing the work for the camp community without any bit of facilitation. From there, they moved to Malakal, met with the camp management. Malakal camp POC is managed by DRC. They had consultation with the DRC as camp management and with the IDP community. One key thing that came out of Malakal was the rapid response mechanism that will sometimes deploy the mobile response team to do quick assessment and then come back and plan for the response. And the question that came out, do we need to send camp management to do the initial assessment for whenever there is an emergency? If there is no partner that would be able to respond to the site, won't we be exciting the displaced population? Because camp management alone will not be able to address the needs of the displaced population. A similar discussion happened in Bentiu with the partners and the IDPs. So what came out from Bentiu was a very strong ask from camp management that we do community-based complaint mechanism. And in a mobile response, is it really realistic to do a community-based complaint mechanism where camp management will be in a site for only 3 months, and then you withdraw, you hand over the management of the site to the community? Who will be able to respond to the complaint that will come after camp management has withdrawn from the site? So I think the consultation in the country was able to provide a lot of nuances around camp management standards, and we hope all these nuances were factored in the current camp management standards that we are rolling out today. Thank you.
Thanks for playing those videos, Alistair. I'm sure that it was really nice for everybody to kind of watch the different friends of CCCM. Particularly, it was touching to me to watch Gio and Chris, who are members of the SAG from DRC and NRC. We're going to change gears a little bit and talk to some of our other working group members. And we're going to hear some examples of how the camp management standards could have been used or are being used in some current operations right now. So we chose people who've been active in the working group because we thought it would be nice to kind of apply the standards. So Tom is now going to start some of his conversations in places that he has deployed to at the same time as those who are on our panel. So we're happy to have Munir Udin from ActionAid Bangladesh to start off the conversation with Tom. So Tom, over to you.
Okay, hello. And hello to everyone on the call. And in particular, hello to Munir, who is joining us from Bangladesh today. For those of us on the call that have worked on the Rohingya response, many of you will recognize Munir through his very active role in the sector. So Munir, could you take me back to late September 2017. You had just started a new job and just started a new role in camp management for the first time. So tell me how, when you were diving into that new sector in the middle of such a large crisis as we saw in late 2017, how were you feeling about that role? And also unmute before you tell us. Still unmuted, Munir.
Sorry, it was
Okay,
mute.
we've got you. We've got you. All right.
So when we started first 2017, so we saw the people are crossing borders, and there is a lack of shelter place. So people are standing on besides roads. They are looking for the shelter. They are looking for the foods and the medicine. So it was the difficult situations. And in the beginning, after a few days, in the one sector meeting, it's called we are going to start the CCCM. So it was very new, and we try to understand actually what is CCCM. We try to discuss with the colleague of IOM and others, and also the going to the CCCM website with the reference of the people. So it was actually a bit difficult to understand the CCCM from us because it was very new, and it's make understand the other stakeholders and government agencies who work at the field level, and also like the coordinating as a CCCM role introducing, and you know that the coordination is a major role for the CCCM agencies. So coordinating with the actors, it was difficult because from the agency we try to coordinate, as well as also the government people don't understand the CCCM, so they also try to coordinate with the actors. So it like the it was actually a very learning situations, also make them it's like we are learning from ourselves, as well as we are trying to make them understand the other sectors and the government people at the camp level. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's a key word, right? Is learning. So how did you, as an individual, start in that process of learning? Who did you turn to? Where did you go for resources?
So when the sector announced that wants to start the CCCM activities, so I was a part of Kishanet, and Kishanet wants to start the CCCM activities at the field level. So it was a very small team, and the Kishanet decided I will be the focal for the CCCM. So we try to first discuss among the actors who interested for the CCCM activities. Then we went to IOM, who are the expert people work that times, like so talk with the IOM colleague to explain us that what is actually CCCM activities and what is the agency roles. And so we go from here and there who are knows like the CCCM, so try to understand from that angles, and we also try to introduce some activities by ourselves, and then we go to the CCCM sector website to understand the CCCM, and as well as like the cross visit who are like, we know that times the acted DRC, they are the international expert, so try to visit their camp to understand the CCCM activity. So it was actually a situation where we try to collect all information from the possible sources to understand the CCCM activities and reflect that in our day-to-day activities at the camp level. And situation also, the sector also like changing the sector coordinator frequently after 2 weeks, after 3 weeks, 1 month. So decision is changing. So it was a situations actually we learn one things, and next day we are feel that it's not the right, we need to do another way. So that was the situation, and I start the CCCM activities at the camp level.
Yeah, and I think something we've talked about is this idea of changing goalposts, right?
Yeah.
Of trying to understand what camp management is, but then that changing depending on who you talk to or where you want. So maybe if you could briefly maybe give 3 examples of some of the big issues that you were tackling as a camp manager at that time.
So one major issue was that like who are the expert people, they are changed frequently. So with the people change, the idea is changing frequently. So adapting with the changing idea, like someone joined from the experience of Iraq, so they wants to reflect that experience. Someone joined from the Africa, so they wants, and the national peoples don't know anything. So we are like it was the confusing situations for the nationals who work with the CCCM and try to adapt the changing situations, and it's always change mode that times. It was the one difficulty. Second difficulty is the standard is changing frequently. So when we start the CCCM activities, coordinating with the other actors, so keeping the decisions and tracking the changing decisions at the field level and coordinating and motivating the actors for the change decision, it was the difficulties at the field level. And third thing is community culture contextualization of the humanitarian assistance. For example, we provided clothes which is Bangladeshi people used to wear, and Rohingya people's dress is the difference. So they use this dress for the rope of the shelter or the other activities. So it's not work for them. We provided food, the Bangladeshi dishes, cooked food, but they don't used to eat that type of food, so they throw it. So contextualize the humanitarian assistance, and especially and also the bit longer situations like the washing facilities for the long period decommissions. So that was the big challenge at the beginning.
Yeah, and so there's a lot going on there, right? Rapid changeover of staff, trying to establish coordination systems that work, contextualizing responses, dealing with
Exactly.
governments, dealing with militaries. So this is then the $1,000,000 question: that if we could have gone back and had that standards document in place in 2017, how do you feel a standards document such as the camp management standards that you've worked on, how could that have helped in the rollout of CCCM activities, and also in the start of your CCCM career?
I think it first helped me to measure the performance and what should I do, that if I get the clearance idea at the beginning, so I can implement accordingly. And also the changing the decision from our side is confusing community peoples because they're hearing the different words from us. So community, if get from the beginning the clear aspect about the site management, so they can communicate easily and they can make accountable also the actors and others that you should do that and your role is that, so I can expect these things from you. So from the CCCM aspects as a manager, it's from the beginning helped me to play my role and ensure the quality of services at the field level, and help me to coordinate and motivate other actors who are working at the field levels. It's clear communication to the participants and the community peoples that what is the CCCM, so they can also set expectation from the site management agencies that what we are going to receive or what type of support we are going to take from the site management agencies. And it's also helped to establish CRFM system at the field level, which is like a big challenge was big at the Rohingya response. So we can establish from the very beginning complaint and feedback mechanism. We can accountable to the ourselves, to the community, as well as the other actors. And it helps CCCM agency for the advocate with the government on behalf of community peoples from the very beginning. So it actually community camp residents will be benefited if we receive this standard from the very beginning, and it will be the effective response in terms of protecting overlapping, in terms of address community needs, and in terms of like motivating community at the crisis situations for their like the life-saving support as well as like the in the crisis peoples, you know, that people's mentally disturbed. So if there is a clear guidance, people's also less sufferer for the standard if there is a common language. And like if you see the Rohingya camps, so different camp practices different. So people, community people also move the different camp and they see the different practice. So it was confused for them. So in the beginning, if we introduce a standard, so community people also the clear about the activities and assistance.
Yeah, so you've given really good insight there. The idea of a common language, a common foundation, and the idea of answering the question, what do we expect from camp management and what do we expect from camp managers? So thank you for the insight, and I will pass over now. I'll pass back to Jem. Thanks, Munir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Munir. And indeed, it would have been really useful to have had the camp management standards as a shared document in the beginning of Bangladesh, but now we do have them, and you can go about the task of kind of contextualizing them, and that will be really useful as well. I just want to point out that you were also involved in the focus group discussion with the refugee men in Bangladesh, and that was something that I didn't highlight, and I just want to say thank you from my heart for that. And it's been such a pleasure to have you on the working group and to hear your experience now. We're going to switch to a more a different challenge within CCCM, and we don't take on small challenges, we take on big challenges in CCCM. And I want to turn to working group member Veronica Costorelli. Veronica, you've been essential in guiding kind of like how
Jen is so overcome with the power of this meeting that it looks like she's frozen solid.
So maybe I could jump in and we could start, and if Jen comes back online or unfreezes, hopefully she hasn't missed too much. So Veronica, hello and welcome. Let's check you're not frozen.
No, I hope not. Hi, everyone.
Wonderful. So I will start with a very 2020 pandemic question, which is, where are you currently? Where do you think you probably should be? And where are the camps that you're part of the management of? Where are they?
That is a very tricky question, Tom. So I'm currently based in Sicily, working remotely for IOM Gaziantep, and I should be based in Gaziantep, but I'm still in Sicily. And the camps we are covering in the northwest Syria.
So, yes, a classic example there of yes,
Italy, Turkey, Syria. Yes, exactly.
Which seems to be impacting a lot of us. So I heard from Jen that you've been implementing a camp management standards pilot in camps based in Syria, cross-border from Turkey, whilst actually being in Sicily. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I was hired by IOM, I think in mid-March. Sorry, let me mute my Skype so then nobody. I will try to. So yes, I was hired by IOM in mid-March to work with the CCCM team based in Gaziantep on the piloting the camp management standard in remote management. Mostly, I have been assessing the capacity of our implementing partners in applying the camp management standard in planned camps and reception sites that are located in northwest Syria, and as well as identify the main challenges faced by them in the implementation of program activities. I mean, it is worth it to mention here that based on the limited availability of local partners in northwest Syria, it is very common that a local NGO implement a multi-sectorial program in each site. normally we will see a clear division of role responsibilities amongst partners working in a camp, for example, camp management, wash, shelter. However, this division of tasks and responsibilities are not very clear and very well mainstream in Northwest Syria. And so you might find an NGO that is covering a multi-sectorial program. So just to give an example, a community mobilizer might be covering camp management activities as well as wash and shelter activities. And so during my consultation with implementing partners, whenever I ask what are the roles and responsibilities of a camp management agency, the reply was, well, camp management agency should provide wash, shelter, food to affected community. So there was no clear understanding of what is actually camp management, the activities that fall under camp management, and the standard related to this. And so, well, if considering the work that we have been doing with the standard, for me, the main challenging was to let them understand the role and responsibilities of the camp management. And it's been at this point like very valuable the use of the camp management standard in developing a capacity building program targeting our implementing partners, and also establishing a monitoring framework that has been used by our IOM team in also monitoring the activities that have been implemented and how they're going to be implemented. It's a very complicated situation, but in general, I would say that through the monitoring framework that we created, we allow them to see that in reality, some activities that have been conducted are falling under the camp management standard. That for them is a little bit very confusing at the beginning to understand what is camp management standard versus shelter wash. And so creating this monitoring framework that it was divided based on standard and indicator was much easier for them to understand which are actually the core activities of camp management standard. And so through this, we have also created a first training that has been conducted online through our amazing trainer, May Barazi, that her support was valuable for this piloting project, where for the first time, we targeted field-based staff in our training. So, and every week we would have working on how the training should be shaped based on the role or responsibility covered by this field staff, considering that they have different activities to cover and not only activities related to camp management, right? And so we shaped a lot of the training. And in this sense, camp management standards were very valuable in order for us to mainstream and pass the messages what are actually the main standard and core activities that are under our sector. So I'm trying to explain simply. I hope I manage the work that is quite complicated for us to even explain.
No, I mean, there you've covered so much. I think going back to the previous conversation from Bangladesh, the idea of roles and responsibilities is so key to how camp management works. Then the idea then of capacity building, which is obviously so important, and especially so when the implementing partners are remote, when we're having to do it online, as we increasingly are now in 2020. And then that idea of monitoring, right? The idea of how do we actually record what we're doing? How do we show that that we are reaching standards? So thank you for a very detailed insight. And maybe I think Jen is back, so I can pass back in case she has anything else. But thank you for running us through it.
For so much details. You're welcome.
Thanks, Vero, and thanks, Tom. That's a really good example of how when you can't physically walk in, you can be able to walk in and to kind of structurally guide people through. We're going to turn now to two more partners who are part of the working group. And Claudia, like Kit, made some of the most extensive comments on the validation survey. And so Claudia, I'm sure that you're going to be taking over from Kit in the next revision of the camp management standards. But first I want to hear from you and Farhan. And we saw your video over the coffee break about trust and dignity and solving problems quickly. And I know in Iraq right now, you have a lot of problems that you're dealing with. So how are you going to use the standards? How are you using the standards? Kind of explain that to us, and to Tom, I think you have some specific questions for Claudia and Farhan.
Yeah, thanks for joining, and especially thanks, as I understand that this week particularly is a rather hectic workload and a sort of very hectic situation in the camp. So maybe you could start by explaining what is going on in the areas that you are operating in.
Okay. First, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Perfect. First of all, we're very happy to both be here, Farhan and myself, Claudia. A little bit about the context that we're currently working in. We're currently in Mosul, in the Nineveh Governorate, where since 2014, basically Iraq is facing a huge displacement crisis, which led to millions of internally displaced persons. Of which 1.4 million people are still displaced as of now, November 2020. We are the CCM team in one of the camps near Mosul, 20 minutes away from Mosul, currently accommodating 11,650 people. And the government of Iraq has since 2019 set as an aim or as a goal to start closing down all the IDP camps. Obviously, COVID came in between, which put a little hold on that. But then since, I would say 1 week ago, we actually got the formal notification that our Camp Salamiyah will also start closing down. Since then, it's been a lot of running around and a lot of ad hoc changes in the formality and in the structure of will it actually close, will it not close, will it remain open till March, and it's been a lot of back and forth, but yeah, it's been pretty chaotic.
Yeah, so the next question then is how do you approach that chaos? How do you approach prepare and plan for camp closures when you may not know the exact date? You may, especially with the incredibly sensitive nature of camp closures.
Well, as Claudia explained, it's been on the table, the discussion of closing camps in Iraq since 2019. So we had time to prepare the required plans, the required SOPs and action points required when we have the call of the camp closures. We've been once we got the notification, we started implementing what we were planning for. We start with attention surveys. We start with a massive key messages campaign where we have we are reaching each individual family in the camp, updating them on the current situation. We also explaining to the community the potential options for them, and also the transportation for the available transportation. I think most of the things we did you can find easily and clearly in the minimum standards if you just pass by the chapter 5.1 and 5.3, which is it will show you straight what kind of action you need to do on the ground, what kind of movement you should take and when. And also it is much clearer to show you the correct action you need to take.
Yeah, I guess it really supports in prioritizing. Obviously, there are another million things that are not written down that are needed, but it's so contextual that Ron as the camp manager, I'm as the deputy, we're having a million calls every day. Like, oh, we also need to do this and we need to do this. Let's set a meeting with only the sector leaders. Let's set a meeting with the women committee or with the youth committee, etc.
Yeah, and I think yeah, that's very clear, and that idea of prioritization of what to go for first, and how to approach such complicated tasks as camp closure. I know someone in the chat mentioned a question around durable solutions, and maybe you could touch on how the camp management standards has helped, but also brought the idea of durable solutions to the fore.
Well, we are in partnership with IOM, who are implementing a go and see visit program, which is aimed to provide the opportunity to the camp resident on going to their area of origin and evaluating their house and their property. So, and the next stage is providing them with a return grant. Such a program is really useful as an end phase for the life of the CCCM. So such programs is really needed for the camp and for the camp residents.
Yeah, I think in general in CCM and in the end phase of CCM at the closure phase of a camp, which in some cases is a forced closure or a mandatory closure that we as humanitarian actors sometimes cannot even stop, whereas sometimes there are not even durable solutions at one stage and there is no alternative location for people to depart to. As camp management, the most important task is, I believe, to at least the process that is going to happen and the procedure to at least ensure that that happens in a dignified and in a peaceful manner by continue, like Fran is on the phone and basically every hour coordinating with local authorities to ensure that everything is streamlined. I want to say perfectly, which is obviously not the case. But in this whole process as CCM, one of the most important tasks is as well coordination with initiatives as IOM, but as well intercells with UNHCR. They're issuing documentation, what a lot of households in the camp are missing. ACTED has another shelter component, which is obviously somehow under the durable solutions. And to coordinate all that and streamline all of that in the best way possible. That's a very important task from our side.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And that idea of you open the box and you say, well, okay, we'll have to look at camp closures, and suddenly everything comes at you. The documentation, the area of origin, even how you can physically transport people back to or onto their location. Maybe if I have time, which I'm not sure if I do, so maybe keep the slightly brief. Coming back to one of the points you made, could you talk a little as to how the camp management standards had pushed the idea of participation from the camp populations? I know you mentioned it briefly, but maybe just to emphasize again how the idea of we're approaching camp closures, how the camp management standards highlights that need for participation.
Well, in my personal opinion, the key to a successful CCCM management is the participation of the community. As much as you make the aim of like the achievement that you would like to achieve clear to your camp resident, it will be much easier for you to achieve it and to reach it. You will hear the opinion, like honestly, you are running a camp full of people. A lot of them might be educated and even might have high education degree than the humanitarian workers themselves. So most of the time we face situations where we approach the camp representatives committee or the women committee or the youth committee or the sector leaders. We have meeting with them discussing certain issues related to the camp. Having the feelings that you can influence the decisions on the camp management agency had many positive impact on the ground. It will be easily for you as camp management, camp manager or the camp management team to implement the activities on the ground easily because you have the support of the people. For example, when we go to collect data or to do a certain survey, we had a lot of meetings with the camp representative, with the sector leaders. We explained to them all the procedure we're going to conduct. This assessment is going to ask for this information. What is your opinion about it? Then you get the feedback. It is a pre-conducting feedback. You can have the feedback on the thing that you are about to do earlier, instead of having the full team on the ground conducting the assessment and coming back to you a day later and you have to go back again. This way it's gain time, you have the opinion of the people, and also if you need to do any changes that will not influence the main aim, you will can easily gain time and do it.
Fantastic. Yeah, there's quite a lot to kind of unpack there. And it is almost a shame that we don't have more time today, because I think this is something, and I think for all three examples, there's, although you're in Iraq, I think there are key takeaways there that can apply to Bangladesh, that can apply to South Sudan, that can apply to Syria or Yemen. And so thank you for taking part and for taking time out during such a busy time. And I think it's great to see that even though the camp management standards are still in a draft phase, although very soon to stop being that way, they can still be operationalized. And so you can have that piloting, but piloting that also gives you some operational structure. So thank you again, and I will pass back over to Jem.
Thanks, guys. It was really nice of you to share your different operational examples of how you've been using them kind of throughout the different stages of their development. And as Tom said, we wanted to keep talking to you, and we had actually planned to do a kind of breakout group at this point, but I think because of time, because it's more interesting to listen to you, we'll switch straight over to the mentee to try to kind of look forward about the strategic direction of where we should go as a working group. Joe and I learned this last week that the working group work doesn't end, even though we finished drafting the standards with Kit's help. Even though we feel like we've accomplished so much in the last 3 years, and we're kind of feeling really proud and happy. Actually, the working group work doesn't end, so we need to get a strategic direction. So I'm going to put up a Menti meter for us, and I see a couple people have dropped off the call, so maybe there's more of the people who are on the working group who can help us define that strategic direction. And I'm going to share screens, and we're going to take a new mentee. So don't anybody leave until we get the strategic direction. And hopefully my, oh no. Someone took a.
Did you pre-vote already, Jen?
I think you might want to just.
I didn't vote.
reset the results, Jen. In the meantime, for folk who, I'm sure all of you use Menti now because we've been using it so much, but if you haven't, if you're new to it, you just need to grab any device, go to an internet browser, type in www.menti.com, that's MENTI.com. Don't type mentimeter.com, and any second now, displayed on your screen, there will be a chart with a code, and you just need to put in that code, and then you'll be able to answer the questions and feed into the chart live.
code, Charlie, for people, and now I can share it because people were voting in the pilot. The code is 175118. And so, I mean, I guess we're going to ask a really blunt question, which is, this should be a safe space for us to talk about what we've done as a working group, and we think that we're ready to share it with the wider CCCM community. I mean, like, those of us that are on the kind of the working group, the people who have presented today, think that we have a really good quality version for you to use. So we want to first just like bluntly ask the question, boldly ask the question. Are you ready for the standards? Are you likely to use them? Right or wrong? Can we start piloting them? Can we have a field pilot edition? And I am scared with the results. I mean, to be a little bit honest, it's a little bit, we don't want a lot of pink. We want more blue. But if you have a reason that you think we should not be sharing them, please put that in the chat. I mean, this is the way in which we work. This is the way in which we get better. So if your concerns haven't been answered through what we've presented now, we need to know what your concerns are, and we want to engage with you. Maybe it was because of time that we didn't get a chance to answer the burning question, like, do they apply out of camps? Maybe you were in the bathroom or taking a coffee and didn't have a chance to see the testaments that were given by the strategic advisory group about how they're applicable in other settings and other contexts. So I'm really happy to see a majority of answers coming through with yes. And for those 4 people that put no, that's okay too. What I would ask you then is advancing to our next question, 5 now, no problem, is
and just a reminder that the no vote was remain.
Yeah, it was already there. That was the test. That was one playing with me. Is how would you suggest that you can give feedback into the standards when you're field testing them? So we're going to ask a next question of you is like, which method would be best for you to give feedback about them? So we can set up a dashboard with a COBO standardized form. We can have you join the working group and to provide a debrief to us. We can have an online kind of community of practice. You can email people. You can certainly email your cluster coordinator. You can certainly email the global cluster coordinators. I know Juan and Dare don't get enough email and they would like more. Joe and I were attending the Humanitarian Standards research kind of support group that was last week, and we learned that the disability inclusion standards actually had a research project that took them over, and that was a really cool idea. We're like, oh wow, we hope a research group kind of takes us over. A lot of the part of 2020 was spent at the beginning in trying to get funding, and we couldn't get standalone funding to be able to pilot them and to set up a secretariat. So some of the time we wasted at the beginning of 2020 was about trying to get a research group, not a research group, but standalone funding for them. And we've kind of done this through different pots of money and through different country offices supporting this. And so if we could get standalone funding, we could certainly do a research group. So thanks for giving the idea about what you would best work for you to give suggestions of feedback in. That helps a lot. I'm not able to look at the chat, but I see chat messages coming up. And those chats are really important. So thanks for your vote on this. Thinking about the future work of the standards throughout the rest of 2020, the last 6 weeks, and into 2021 in the strategic kind of vision. We want you to vote about how you would request the working group to prioritize so that you were able to use the minimum standards. And I guess this is where the collaboration between the working groups come together again. Because if you choose as your first priority capacity building training materials, then we just reach right out to Elena and we say, Elena, we've got to work on some training materials. We've got to revise our work plan for next year. If you say kind of activity sheets or sample activity sheets, then we'll reach over to Catherine, who piloted them in the work that she did when she was cluster coordinator in Somalia. So then we'll have as a working group kind of different tasks. So maybe spend a minute to think about within your own role, what way would help you to be able to achieve your application of the standards and to use them to their best fruition. So I see a lot of people voting for capacity building training materials. And maybe it's a reflection of who's on the session right now, that we're seeing less in relationship to translation, for example. But certainly these are all ways in which it can prioritize and help support your work. Remember that the standards are cross-referenced back into the camp management toolkit. So a good practice guide is now winning. I'm reluctant to close this poll because I see different things taking different places and priorities. But it's really useful for us to know how to prioritize. And then maybe the last question, I don't want to, there's still people voting. The last kind of strategic question for us to answer is around the dissemination, and the dissemination of the standards is how you get to use them. So in this poll, you get 100 points, and you get to choose what is your recommendation for the dissemination of the standards, and you can vote all 100 of your points into an official launch with VIPs and virtual champagne, or you can vote for a combination of things that you think would again help you to be able to use the standards best in your role. And this is a different fun way of voting that can help us understand what are our next steps together as the cluster and together as implementing agencies. So I see different answers coming in with an official launch, a webinar, which means more partnership with PHAP, which would be really great. I see a simulation kind of being at a lower end. Maybe I can just explain what that would be. That would be actually a simulation would be a kind of pilot in which we would show the utility of the standards in practice. Promotional materials, frequently asked questions. Oh, someone liked my explanation of what a simulation would be. Again, we really rely upon you and your feedback about what can make the standards most relevant to all the different ways in which you've seen them applied, both in plan camps, in remote settings, in closure.
Just to add on to this, Jen, and to let everybody know that if you've started answering these questions and you haven't finished, if Jen needs to stop sharing, don't worry, because your answers will all be collated and all of this data is going to be used by the working group. So if you get a chance to answer these questions, just do so, even if it's not during this session, even if it's afterwards.
Thanks for that, Charlie. I am going to stop sharing, and I am 5 minutes over. Turning back over to you, Charlie, but I just really want to thank everyone who presented. We've become more than just colleagues through this process. We have grown the example of the history and legacies within the CCCM family, and we are now part of history together. So thank you very much, Veronica, Munir, Claudia, Farhan, Kit, Aninia, and Marcus. Charlie, over to you.
Thank you, Jen. There's one question from Miguel in the chat, which I think definitely needs an answer. It's about where they can find the standards. I'll leave you to do that. I think then just a really quick reminder about tomorrow. Just to say we're at our final day tomorrow. We're looking at strategy, and I will be leading that session. So I hope at least most of you turn up. I also just want to thank everybody for today's session. if, like me, you work quite a lot of time with organizations that support humanitarians to support disaster affected communities, and sometimes you feel that perhaps all that work you're doing around coordination or around capacity building or around standards feels a little bit distant, then it's sessions like this and hearing the testimonies that we've heard from the people we've heard that really remind me, certainly individually, as to why I do what I do. And personally, I would like to say thank you for that. It's made a big difference to me, and I think it just shows how important and how powerful this work on standards is. So thank you to everyone who's doing that. We've done a lot of Menti today, so I'm tempted not to ask you to do any more. So I don't think I will do that. I think instead, what I will do is just stop sharing that, and just perhaps there's only one way to end this session, and see if you can, let me know if you can hear this.
Gonna remind us the 5 o'clock?
Yeah, sorry, Juan, that's a really good point. So I forgot completely, terrible. I'm very sorry. So at 5 o'clock in 1 hour's time, or in 55 minutes time, if you want to get back together to just do a bit of networking with CCCM colleagues, we've got a session there where we'll be gathering people together, getting into groups, having a chat about work things or non-work things, just an opportunity to meet other people who are working on CCCM in different parts of the world. Or just an opportunity to catch up with old friends who, due to COVID, you might not have seen for a long time. So thanks everyone for today. Really good session, fantastic. And we will hopefully see some of you in about 55 minutes. If not, then we'll definitely see you tomorrow. Bye for now.
Are we still getting any music to see us?
We can do that, we can do that.
Land, lots of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide open country that I love. Don't fence me in. Let me be by myself in the evening breeze. Listen to the murmur of the cottonwood trees. Send me off forever, but I ask you please. Don't fence me in. Don't fence me in. Just turn me. Straddle my own saddle underneath the western skies. On my guidance, let me wander over yonder till I see the mountains rise. I want to ride to the ridge where the west commences. Gaze at the moon until I lose my senses.
It's entirely up to Juan when this whole charade finishes, so that's up to you, Juan.
Don't fence me in.
Juan doesn't know how to turn it off.
Don't fence me in.
Tomorrow there'll be a full disco with DJ Alistair.
Oh, come on, someone's got to have a mirror ball.
We need everybody in the debrief.
Do you do the debrief now?
We did that on the
No recording.
Give me land, lots of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me.
Oh.
Patricia, can you stop the recording, please?
Yes, I will.
I think this is a very good point, Patricia.